good afternoon, good morning to everyone, and welcome to our newest edition of the Management Supervision webinar. We are really excited to have Ken here join us from Central Region. He's going to share with us about some conflict management tips and tricks of the trade. Really excited to hear what he's got to say. Just a few logistics things. We are here on GoTo webinar, and so we've got some opportunities to engage. I've got everybody on mute right now, but you will have the opportunity to get in there with questions. You can submit them to us through the chat feature, and we will also have some interactive polls throughout the session today. So Ken's going to want to hear from you as much as you hear from him, so be ready to participate in those. With that, I will turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, Christina. Hey, thank you for tuning in. I know it's always busy to interrupt your day, and there's always stuff going on, but I hopefully that this session will be useful for you, this and the follow-on session, so maybe we can take some of the, at least, fear away from conflict management and give you some tools by the end of the hour or so that you're able to use to maybe help in your professional life, maybe even your personal life if you choose to, and then the follow-on activity will be done with some practice techniques. So I'm Ken Harding. I'm the Deputy Director of Central Region. I've been here about 3 years in Kansas City. I've moved all over the place. I've been a meteorologist, I've been a science officer, I've been an MIC, and now I've been at Region for a while. And I want to start this conflict management discussion with a quote that I think talks about conflict very well. And so this is your first quote from the Buddha. Facing reality is really the point of this quote. And conflict management is really nothing more than facing reality exactly as it is and then doing something about it, or not, depending on how you choose to manage the conflict that you may be a part of. So what I'd like to do is start with a poll question. So Christina, if we could throw that up there. I'm interested in what makes you the most nervous about conflict. So I think there's a poll question coming.
Yep, we've got a poll question in here with a few options for you to choose from. You can just go ahead and click directly on the answer on the screen and submit it, and that will submit it to us. And we've actually got some people are paying attention right away, Ken.
Hey, how about that?
Well, we've got a good chunk of votes in. Keep those submitting. Get some practice for this as we are going to use the tool throughout the rest of the webinar. And this will help inform how the rest of our session goes.
Yeah, so.
All right, so we've got most of the folks voted and in here. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we'll see what kind of answers we've got here. And I'll share this with everybody. All right, so our results came back. 38% is the most, feel okay about it, but know they could get better. 30% need tools to help manage it when I'm directly involved. 17% hate conflict and would just like to avoid it entirely. And 15% need tools to help manage it among my teams.
So maybe we should have had a response of it depends on the conflict.
Yep.
You know, it's what radio to listen to in the car, or is it, you know, something much more important than that. So.
All right, so we will go back to the presentation there for you, Ken.
Okay, and I think we're ready. Here we go.
Okay.
So what do I know about conflict? Well, I am 55 years old. I am a member of the human species, and so I've had my share of conflicts in those 55 years, as all of you have had. I've successfully raised a child, which brings in its own brand of conflict, and the opportunities is there. And I've been a supervisor on and off through several different agencies for 15 plus years. So that also brings some professional level of conflict. One of the places that I learned most about conflict, though, as a sports official, and basketball and football at the high school and college level for over 18 years, and near as I can guess, about 3,600 sporting contests that I've worked. And if you want to do conflict under time pressure, where there's a score kept, somebody wins, somebody loses, everybody questions your judgment, and go be a basketball official. It's a pretty good learning laboratory for understanding about conflict. And I'll share some of the things I've learned myself in my journey as a basketball official and a football official as we move through this. So I ask for you, depending on the job that you have, what is the most difficult thing you do every day? And we do have hard jobs, but some of our jobs aren't the hardest out there. I mean, this is a hard job. This probably is going to be a hard job. Certainly, we don't fight bears every day, and sometimes it's very difficult math, but so we have hard jobs, but the biggest thing that we do every day is people. I always said the science is easy, the people are hard. And dealing with people isn't as always predictable as the science can be. And I think that's where conflict management is important, is this is the common thing of all of your day-to-day interactions is working with people. So slide, please. So conflict. We have a poll, I think.
Yes.
And that's active. It's coming up there.
There we go. That should be open.
So one of the things, as you answer the poll, my conflict management style has matured over the years. I'd like to say it's gotten better. Maybe I'm just more aware. But as a young basketball official, one of the things that bothered me the most was getting yelled at. I kind of got used to it. I think, some people just yell at the official just because it's part of the game. And they would yell things at you they'd never say to you in the street or even in the gymnasium after the game. But one of the nice things about being a basketball official is that the coach is yelling at you. Usually within a few seconds, you get to run away and go to the other side of the court. So my dealing with conflict was I wouldn't say much because I would stumble over my words and then I would run away. And I don't say that's probably the best way to deal with conflict, but it worked for me until I would learn some tools and techniques to deal with a heated conflict or a very contentious discussion with somebody. So your conflict management skills can evolve over time. You actually get a chance to practice that probably every day, and ideally in a healthy way. So let's look at the poll, see what we had.
Okay, we'll close that poll and I'll share our results. And so the question was, what are confrontations you typically avoid? 51% said addressing performance issues. 32%, we have a tie for respect issues and communication problems. 18% said teamwork issues and 12% said other. And some of the things that we have in our chat box, we have avoiding conflict with politics, addressing poor attitudes, or typically avoid minor issues, or just don't want to make other people feel bad.
Yep, those are all fair. Performance issues, whether you're a supervisor or a peer, I'm not too surprised that was the first one, because that impacts not only the person who is in the conflict, but everybody around them if their performance is not up to par and people have to either take on extra work or cover for them and fix their work when they're done. So that's pretty common when that happens. So interesting to see those results.
Yep. Yeah. So we're back to your presentation.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward.
Okay.
So this is a question I'd like to ask you, and it's a thought question. There's no poll. What is actually worse, the conflict or worrying about the conflict? You may have a perspective, but if you worry about the conflict, you've doubled your worries, because now you not only you have the conflict, you have to worry about it. So I think maybe some of the tools that we're going to talk about in a bit here can help you get past the worrying about conflict and just let you address the issue that you want to try and solve, or at least call out, or whatever technique that seems to be the best for the conflict that you're in. But worrying about something doesn't make it go away, it just makes it worse. So I can say don't worry about it, and that's certainly not something that you're going to do. You're going to worry if you want to, but you think about what are you worrying about, and the worst case scenario is probably not going to happen anyway. So
yeah, just we have some folks that commented in the chat that worrying about it every time they completely agree with, and someone said it's never even as bad as I expect it to be once it's addressed, especially when it's addressed with compassion.
And a lot of times the person on the other side of the conflict wants to start it too, but they just don't know how. And once you get it figured out, you both feel better about it. Like, well, that wasn't so bad. And that ideally that's the case, but that's not always they don't always go right either. And so but sometimes worrying about it isn't going to make it any better. I'll teach you not to worry about it. What I'll teach you to do is prepare for it. And I think that's important. That takes the worrying away. So we go on. So let's just go back to a few definitions here. The conflict is a competitive or opposing action, which is, antagonistic state. This is kind of a negative, divergent ideas. You don't have a conflict if you all agree on everything. Maybe you're conflicted on how much you agree with it, but, the mental struggle, incompatibility, that marks a conflict. You could probably all add words to here or things, your definition of conflict, but it's opposing viewpoints or opposing requests for outcome. And a controversy is much less than that. It's just a discussion marked by expressing views. So, sometimes we forget this. We can disagree with people and not be upset with them. We can have a controversy or discuss a controversial topic and not go into conflict. We can just agree to disagree on a topic that doesn't need resolution. So someone mentioned politics earlier or things like that. Some of us don't bring it up at work. It's just easier that way. But if you do, certainly you can agree to disagree. That's more of a controversy than a conflict. So how do we do conflict management? First of all, unhealthy conflict. This shouldn't surprise anybody. High stress, low rational thinking, kills trust, mutual respect, effective communication, it's detrimental to your productivity. I say it impacts our ability to do our mission. I mean, if we are in a constant state of conflict or worrying about this conflict in our office, it impacts our ability to provide decision support services and science-based services. It's not healthy energy that we're using to perform our mission. It takes up the entire office sometimes when it's like this. That's related to a healthy conflict, which is normal. And some people look at this and say, how can conflict be normal? How can it be creativity? If you think about you're trying to get something to change, whether it's something as insignificant as the color of your socks, or you'd like to have a change in the way the office performs some topic or something in your personal life, you can't change it without some version of conflict because you're changing something to something different. There may be some internal conflict. You may have shareholders who don't want to change this, so you have to convince them. And so healthy conflict is very critical to change, to grow, become individually diverse, but also it's a leadership skill that I think having in your toolkit the availability to initiate healthy conflict can help a team grow and solve problems so you can move on to more important things. So that's when I talk about initiating conflict as a leadership skill. And sometimes I get sort of a cross-eyed look like, why would a leader cause conflict? That's your job. A leader's job is to cause conflict because it's healthy conflict. It helps people change, it helps things grow, and then you move forward. A bad leader will basically ignore the conflict. So an effective leader, I say, values healthy conflict, and you must address the unhealthy conflict very quickly. And if you're healthy in your conflict, you don't have as much time, you have more trust, you have less unhealthy conflict. So we can make lists and things like that all the time, but it's more difficult than we make it say on a slide here. So let's move on to something different. So what are the origins of conflict? You can probably add some of these in the chat box if you want to see something that's there. Change is a big one. We're going through a lot of that in the Weather Service all the time. Poor communication. I'm reminded that, especially as a leader or as a supervisor or as a team member, I've never been accused of over communicating. And I think I'm doing a great job until somebody says, well, I didn't know this was going on, or I wasn't aware of this, or if you'd only told me this story. So poor communication or not enough communication. We have different values. Someone may value like an alternate work schedule. Someone may value a traditional work schedule. There's a conflict built in there. Maybe the expectations are different. Emotions are a big part of it. People get caught up with their point of view and then get emotionally attached to it. So that adds to the stress, and that all adds to conflict. I don't know if we have any chat answers of other origins there.
No, pretty quiet on chat right now.
Good. Okay.
I think they're rapidly paying attention again.
They've all gone to do DSS. So here's a lot of methods of resolution of conflict, and some are good, some are bad. The first one is, you want to win. That was very much similar to the sports that I did. One side was always trying to win. I don't know that that's necessarily true, because the opposite of that is somebody has to lose. Now, you can lose with grace or you can lose poorly, but if your goal in conflict is to win, that's probably not the healthiest way to resolve it. One of my favorites that I used to do was run away. Just ignore it. Give in, like, I don't want to cause trouble. I think we had a poll question like that. I don't want to, bring this up. I'm uncomfortable making other people, so I'll just give in, and whatever happens, I'll be okay with. Or if I'm not okay with, I'm not going to say something. Take control is more of a power play. You use the conflict to your advantage to, belittle people, force their ideas from coming out. That's not a healthy way to approach a conflict. Accommodation. So that's an interesting word. Accommodate kind of means getting along, but the conflict doesn't go away. And a nice example of accommodation I like to say is it's like feeding the lion and hoping that it eats you last, because it's going to eat you. So you can accommodate a conflict, but ultimately it's going to come back and bite you so if you don't address it. Compromise sounds okay, but then no side gets what they want, even if there's a clearly better response. So compromise isn't a bad resolution technique, but it's maybe not the best. Being fair is interesting. I hear a lot of people say, I just want to be fair. Fair kind of implies alternating win. You win this time, so I'll win the next time. What if the nature of the conflict is such that something is a lot more important than the other ones? So being fair doesn't necessarily mean being equal. And it doesn't necessarily mean if I win this time, you have to win next time, which is why, surprisingly, I get to the last one, collaboration. And I think you work together to solve a conflict without deciding a winner or a loser, just trying to get the best bet. One of the things as a basketball official, before the game, you stand out on the court and you watch the teams warm up. And it's not to see who can make the most layups or who's the best shooter. You're actually watching the tendencies of the players. Who is really serious, who's taking it easy, who's a natural leader on the team, and it may not be the person with the captain's jersey on. And you use these natural leaders to your advantage if there's a conflict on the team. If you've got a couple folks that have seemed to have lost their sense of, they're being too aggressive or they're, too mad, you go to the natural leader on the team and say something and let them fix the conflict. So as an official, you would come in as an authority figure, and you could, blow the whistle, you could do all sorts of things to interrupt the game. But if you had a natural leader on the team to help take care of conflict for you, it was a better resolution for everybody involved. And it really spoke to the natural leadership abilities of the people on the court. And sometimes the leader was the coach, sometimes it wasn't the coach. But I think you can look at that in your office too. If there's a conflict, there's multiple people in the office. Sometimes natural leaders can be used to help resolve that, at least get the people to collaborate first. So we did that a lot in basketball. We looked for who's the leader of the team, and it wasn't necessarily the most senior person. It wasn't necessarily the captain, the elected leader of the team. And you could actually see how people responded. And if you watch in your day-to-day life, staff meetings, any situation where there's a lot of people, some people just naturally seem to get more attention. People, they say something, people listen to what they say. They may, try and get more ideas out from other people. These are the natural leaders that you can use to collaborate conflict resolution. And in fact, maybe that's you out there. That might be a skill that you have or can work on. So let's move on. I think we have the 3 levels of skill. These are the, I guess what I define as, how do you do conflict? One is ignore it, like just, I want nothing to do with it. I'm running away. The other 2 is sort of the accommodation. I'll put up with it. I don't enjoy it, but it happens. I don't really want to get involved, but I'm just gonna do what I do and try and not get too involved with it. And the third, which is surprising, is the leadership skill of initiating conflict to solve a problem. And again, this is the initiation of healthy conflict. So I think we have a poll talking about what tricks you might use to avoid conflict.
Yep, so I've launched that now and it's available for you to submit. What tricks do you use to talk yourself out of confrontation?
So while you're answering that question, earlier I said as a young basketball official, I wouldn't talk to coaches and I would just run away. And that clearly didn't work, because at some point you're going to be back in front of the coach and the question they ask is, why won't you talk to me? And there's really no good answer for that question. Coach, I don't like you. Coach, I don't know what to say to you. Coach, you're probably right. I am bad, and I don't want to admit that. There's really no good answer to a coach. So I had to evolve in my ability to speak with someone. And one of the things that's difficult and I'm going to use this refereeing example, is sometimes the coach is upset. And you can probably all think back into some point in your career or your life where you're dealing with another person who is upset. And when someone's upset or mad, probably the worst thing you can do is tell them to calm down, because that's probably going to make it go the other direction. Telling someone calm down, first of all, implies that they're not calm, and they may think they're perfectly calm. And then you're ordering them to do something with their emotions that you have no authority to do. So I would say that, calm down or quit, is not a great conflict resolution opening statement. So if a coach was upset, the coach was yelling, and there was a chance to work with the coach, one of the techniques that I use is I would ask the coach a question. And that did several things. One, it allowed the coach to know that I'm interested in their opinion, but also made the coach think. And, you know, anger is a very, you know, stem of your brain early on, you know, primitive response, fight or flight response. But answering a question is a frontal cortex response, a higher level part of your brain. So if I can get that coach out of his anger center of his brain and get that coach into their thinking part of their brain, I don't have to tell them to calm down because they've already done so. So I would ask the coach a question. The coach would be screaming, there's traveling, or that's a foul, you've got to call that. So I would say, coach, help me out here. What's the number of the player that fouled? And the coach had to stop. He had to recall a memory and then form a sentence to tell me. And then I would use some body language. I would speak very quietly with the coach, and then she would have to lean into me to hear me. So the coach is in my body, in my personal space, and I'm comfortable with it because I invited him in. They're not comfortable. So there was some body language and some techniques to do. So if someone is yelling, ask them a question and ask them softly. And the best thing to say is, wait, you know, can you speak up? I can't hear you. So now you know they're really listening. And so those were some of the skills that I just learned. Wasn't ever really taught to me. I learned by watching other folks and what worked and what didn't work. And it didn't always work. Sometimes the coach was mad because the coach wanted to be mad. And they wanted to be mad so their players could see them all fired up, and then the players would get more involved and invested in the game because the refs were out to get them and we're going to show them. And so, you know, the coaches would initiate conflict too for the benefit of their team. But I'm interested in the poll results, Christina, what we have.
Yeah. All right, I will go ahead and close those and share it out for us. So for our responses, we had 63% of folks said kind of went with the, even if I talk to them, it's not going to do any good. 47% have they'll figure it out and it'll resolve itself, kind of internal conversation. Next, we have their idea is good enough, but why waste time on more options? If I confront them, they're going to hate me. And then as far as other, we had some folks said they're concerned about retaliation. Others have that they think it'll be taken care of by somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have they're concerned about kind of the follow-up reaction and how to handle that. And so since they haven't figured that out, maybe they don't initiate yet.
Right. Yeah, and it's difficult, you know, and certainly I'm not suggesting that, you know, after 40 minutes of PowerPoint, you go make conflict with everybody and it's going to work out great. You know, that's really not the point here today. The point here is to give you some options. But I think those answers are really fair. Sort of the resolve, you know, I can try something, but it's not going to do any good. I think a couple of the techniques that we're going to talk about here in just a second might help that 63% group of those that if you actually have a plan and a technique, it probably will do some good. And will it solve the conflict? It may or may not, because again, it takes both of you to agree to do to that to collaborate level to solve a conflict. But if you're truly invested in a solution and you make a good attempt and they just don't want to play, then I think there's really, you feel pretty good about yourself. You've made the effort. They're probably not going to hate you because you were genuine about it. And you know, when I say the conflict will probably resolve itself, I can't think of one that does, unless somebody leaves. But you know, it's going to fester and it's going to get worse. You know, oh, it's just a minor chainsaw, you know, an injury. It's not. It's going to get better. Like, no, it's not. It's going to get worse. And so I think those are some really interesting responses. But I think if you do talk to them and do it right, it will do some good. So.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, that 28% about the idea being good enough and why waste time on more options. I think it's interesting when we talk about healthy, healthy conflict, and maybe that there being opportunities for better results to come out of things by encouraging that kind of healthy conflict. I think so. I think there's some interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting that, you know, it's good enough, but really, is there a better option? And you know, why waste time? Well, they might have the answer, like, yeah, you're right, that is the answer, and you move on. But generally, you want some collaborative effort, especially if it's a conflict that's been around for a while or keeps repeating itself. So.
Alrighty, so let me hide that and return back to your screen there.
Okay.
Alrighty.
I'm ready. Yep,
Okay.
please.
There you go.
All right, so here's a couple methods, and there's literally hundreds of books out there on conflict resolution, conflict management. I have a lot of them. I'm kind of a nerd on this now. I really kind of enjoy learning about it. But there's 3 methods that I'm going to talk about today that may or may not help you. And some of these we're going to use as our follow-on activity. But the first one is from a book called Courage, the Backbone of Leadership by Gus Lee. I really highly encourage every one of you to look at this book, check it out, buy it for your personal library, talk to your management team and have them buy it for the office. It's a really good book, and it gives us some conflict resolution, conflict management techniques. The other one is what I'll call a moment of choice, and this is a technique by a gentleman named Dr. Tom Bennett, who used to teach at the training center and some of the senior leadership programs. But he talks about a moment of choice, and specifically I'll talk about your hot button issues, so those issues that when they come up, you go from 0 to 100 right away. And the third one is from a podcast that I enjoy listening to, the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast. He talks about managing the tension of a conflict. So let's just go ahead and go forward and talk about Gus Lee's. Gus Lee has a model, CLEAR, if you want to remember it. And basically, it's similar to some of the other models. The communicate collegially is, unconditional, positive respect. If you go into somebody and say, well, I hate you, but we need to work this out, you're probably not going to do a great job on a collaborative effort on this conflict that you have. So respect the person because they deserve respect as a person, and then be collegial, be pleasant, try to understand. The second one is listen actively with empathy. Remember, it says to listen first before you make your point. I'm always reminded that I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's about the appropriate, listen twice as much as you talk. I don't think that's an accident, but listen with empathy, because you're really trying to understand their story. Because if the person you're in conflict with feels that you're really listening and trying to understand their point of view, they may reflect that and try and understand your point of view. They may not. There's no guarantees here, but you can probably understand the reasons for their attitude or the reasons for their words if you listen with empathy. Then ask questions. Ask questions on point. Like, why are you so hard to get along with? It's not a question on point. Help me understand why this is important to you. A question like that would be good for them to continue to give you more information about what their point of view is in this conflict. And then relate respectfully, because as they're doing this for you, giving you reflections, giving you open-ended answers to questions, you're doing the same for them. And just be respectful about it. Remember, they're a human being. They deserve unconditional positive respect, whether you can't stand them or not. We don't have to like everybody we work with, but we do have to get along, and we have a shared mission. And that shared mission might be raising kids. It might be putting out grid forecast. It might be working on a community service project. This model that Gus Lee talks about works across all of those types of things. But I'm interested how it sees that, respect and listen are the first 2 of his courageous communications model. He goes into much more detail in the book. And so this one is interesting. Remember from high school biology, you had action, reaction. That's a very emotional thing. So there's an action, maybe a conflict, maybe a statement, maybe someone yells, hey, ref, buy some glasses, and then you have this emotional reaction. And emotions, although not inherently good or bad, they just are. A lot of emotions that happen when someone says something negative to you are negative emotions. Not many people are really really happy when someone says, hey, ref, you need to go back to school, or don't you know what you're doing out here, or they're yelling at you, questioning things about you. Very rarely do I get that delighted icon shown in that emotional reaction when that happens. Like, oh yeah, they're right, I am pretty bad. That's generally not the first thought that you get. So, but they're your feelings, and you're perfectly entitled to your own feelings. So you can react, but I suggest you react internally and don't take actions based upon a reaction. So what does the E stand for? The E is emotion. You have to understand what the emotion. So what you want to do in a conflict, here's a possible method, is when someone says something to you or does something that bothers you, don't make it about them. why are you always, talking bad about me? Or you never do this. You speak in platitudes, or you speak in absolutes, and you put them on the defensive right away. So the technique for this action to emotional reaction is state the action. When you do something, then you name the emotion that it elicits. I felt. And it's very difficult for the person on the other side of the conversation to say, no, you didn't feel that way, or your emotion is irrelevant. No, you can't possibly feel that way. They can say you can't possibly think that, but they can't argue that you can't feel that way because you own your emotion. So for example, I'll give you, having a conversation with a coworker who likes to gossip. And I would say, when you gossip about me, I feel disrespected. It seems to me talking to me would be a better response than guessing what my rationale is. And so their response isn't going to be, oh, no, you don't feel disrespected. Their response might be, well, I never intended to disrespect you. And there's the opening that you have now to communicate collegially and speak with them and try and understand why they would rather guess about your reactions than ask you directly. Maybe you're not approachable. Maybe you intimidate them. Maybe they just, but you say, when you did something, I felt this, and then you move forward with, it seems to me that, and then you make your statement. But when you call me an idiot, I felt you were stupid. That's not what I'm saying, because they can argue about that. So you have to make it personal, and you have to be a little vulnerable here to make it personal, to share it with them, because that's the authenticity and the collegial communication that you need to build a bond to solve this, whatever this conflict might be. It's not easy, and it takes some time, it takes some practice, but every time courage beats authority. And I've heard people, you speak truth to authority. If you have courage, you can use this with your boss. You have to be smart about it, and you have to practice it. And we're going to give you some tools to practice it with. So this is one of those things that I think is worthy of a practice, and it's worthy of a role play with a partner, with a peer, someone to make sure you don't stumble over your words or make it worse than the idea. So this, conflict management is like anything. Practice is really a good thing. And I still do that today. If I'm going to have something that might be a conflict, I will have a peer or a group of people that I will practice on. I'll role play it. What could go wrong? Give me some feedback. Am I doing this right? I take notes. I think about it. And I'm not obsessing on it. This may be a 5-minute process, but I want to make sure that my intentions are right, and that I'm not going to make it worse when I initiate this conflict. So one technique right there. So the other technique from Tom Bennett is this moment of choice, and it's very similar. Action leads to reaction, but what you do with that in that middle of those two is the moment of choice. And let me get the next slide there. So that moment of choice, and then you can decide to react, or you can use the higher brain issue of responding. And so what I think about here is this moment of choice. How do you use your moment of choice? And we got a poll question here, and the poll question is hot button issues. And a hot button issue is an issue such that as soon as somebody brings it up, you go nuts. This is something that's so offensive, so important, so pick the word, that you have a very difficult time not reacting. It might be political, it might be something. But so we're going to throw up a poll question and ask for some, what your hot button issues might be. So I'll share mine. I'm pretty comfortable with my 2 hot button issues, even after all these years. My first one is questioning my commitment, and the other one is questioning my competence. And not that I'm the most competent person, and not that I'm the most committed person, but I do everything I can to maintain my competency and be relevant. And then I am committed to this mission, to this job, to this agency. So if you think about my hobby of refereeing basketball, what do you yell at officials about? Competence and commitment, right? So you're just here for the check. You don't really care about the game. You don't know what you're doing. Those are my hot buttons right there. And I figure, it happens dozens to 100 times a game, and I've done just short of 4,000 games. So my hot buttons have been pressed 40,000 times, and they're still there. They're still absolutely there. But I take that moment of choice when that hot button is pressed, and I choose to respond to it with a technique as opposed to getting mad and screaming back, because then you're just, you're increasing the fire. You're not solving it, you're making it worse. Not that you always have to solve it, and sometimes if it's you might have to make it worse if it's a fight type situation. I'm not talking about that. This is kind of a work related thing, but those hot buttons, you should be able to identify your own, and I think the poll questions might be interesting to see the answers.
All right.
What they have.
I'm going to go ahead and close out our poll here and share the results. So let's see, we've got a lot of people get pushed by complaints without suggested solutions. Also, people who get their competence questioned, like you have. The "it's not my job," questioning commitment, it comes in third there. And then some of the things that have come in the other are, some of them are very similar, of the I didn't sign up for this, people who pass the buck when somebody wants them to fix something, and they just pass it on to somebody else. Believing misinformation. We've always done it this way. That's one of mine. People being accused of stealing their ideas. They won't give the truth. Disrespect and being rude. People complaining about how they're busy when they're not. Questioning honesty. Oh, you don't have the big picture was one of them.
So it's kind of a belittling.
Yeah.
You don't know what I know, so you can't possibly understand. Boy, that's horrible. that's terrible to say that. So these are all incredibly valid, and I think self-awareness is really critical. So if these are your hot button issues, they're probably always going to be. Maybe some of these tools, techniques, and stuff can help you respond to those as opposed to react. And you know what? There are people in every office who want you to react because it's fun. And not everybody is like that, but I used to show a video clip of a couple airplane pilots, and they were saying things over the intercom just to make the passengers upset because it was funny. Like, don't be alarmed if an engine fails. And that's what they would say on the intercom. Or, we are not about to die. So, that's what they would say on the intercom. So they do that on purpose to make people upset. And you might have people in your office who are very passionate about politics, and somebody 1 minute before their shift is over drops the bomb, hey, what did you think about this? And then they walk out because they just set up the next 2 hours for this person to go absolutely nuts. And some people just like to do that. You can't control them. They get to choose how they act, but you can respond to them and not react and take away their fun if possible. So these are all really good, really good.
It's my nephew likes to knock down any tower that he finds. We just say he likes to watch the world burn. I think he's like those people.
Wait, so this is like a young person?
He's like 4.
Okay, good, because I'm thinking like he's 27 and that's a problem. Good to know. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on.
So this is from the Andy Stanley podcast, and I think the first quote is interesting. Leaders don't solve every problem. And some folks say, well, isn't that the leader's job, is to fix stuff? Absolutely not. The leader's job is to facilitate people to grow and fix their own problems. A leader's job is to set an environment and a culture such that problems can be discussed openly and solved. So there's a couple things that this podcast talks about. One is it's a recurring problem. The problem never goes away. It just keeps coming up. And what's a problem that never seems to go away? And I'll just take from the WFO level, the shift schedule. Somebody's either happy or unhappy. Somebody gets their mids moved around. Somebody takes leave. It costs you a weekend. It may not be a burning end of the world problem, but it's a conflict, it's a tension, and it never goes away. And you're never going to fix it because there's not going to be 15 people in an office who all agree this is a perfect schedule, and every time it's changed, it's exactly how I want it to be. So the third way to solve the problem is sort of to manage it. Understand that it is a conflict, over communicate about changes to the schedule, to the rotation, get people's inputs, be honest, be transparent with changes to the schedule, give people a reason for it, doesn't solve the problem, but it does help make it palatable. So that's a conflict that never goes away, that you can just live with. Another thing that's difficult for some leaders is, or anybody, is people like to fix things. Here's something, well, here's what you've got to do, and you tell someone how to fix it. But in a leadership position, and whether it's formal leadership or informal leadership, it doesn't matter. It's still a leadership position. If there's mature advocates on both sides of an issue, let them work it out. The leader doesn't have to jump in the middle and solve every problem. If they're both respectful, working on it together, collaborate, let them do it. Let them solve their own problems. So let them work it out. Don't let it get out of hand, and don't let it bring in, turn the office into sides, but let people work the conflicts out. You don't have to fix it for them. And then another thing to think about is, many times there's common ground. I'm not sure if he's on here today, but I spend quite a bit of my time negotiating with the Central Region steward, Jim Lee. And we don't agree on some things. That's just the nature of the management and ECO relationship. But what we do have is we have a common ground of the mission of the Weather Service, a commitment to the protection of life and property, and a commitment to our employees. And since we can agree on that, there's nothing we can't solve. Sometimes it doesn't always go quickly, and there's a lot of back and forth there, but there's respect, and there's an understanding, there's common goals. So I think people that have conflicts in your work, your personal life, I think you can agree on some common goals. And it doesn't have to be all of yours or all of theirs. Sometimes a little of both works. So next slide there. So another thing Andy talks about is managing the tensions. Again, you don't have to solve every problem. There's a tension, you just have to work with it. The CEO of IBM in a Harvard Business Review article probably about a year ago talked about leaders need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the only way you can change things. So get comfortable managing problems, get comfortable managing tensions, because again, change is a tension. Are there problems that shouldn't be solved? Again, leaders don't solve every problem, but some problems don't need to be solved. They may solve themselves, and they may go away, they may be transient. So be a referee. If you actually get pulled into a conflict and it's not of your making, are you really neutral? I mean, are you an unbiased observer? Are you truly neutral, or are you, do you want this kind of to go one way or the other? That's fair. Just be honest about it. And when you communicate, be authentic and tell people that. And then another part is look in the mirror. And sometimes this is very difficult for people to do, and ask the question, what's the downside to my side? A technique that I like to use when I'm role-playing in conflict is I argue the other person's point and have the person I'm role-playing with argue my point. And I learn a lot about the other person's side of view by trying to argue the point for them, even if I disagree with it terribly. And so when you look at what is the downside to my side, that self-reflection is going to help you understand their point of view, and so you can get to collaboration. And this is a sort of a statement that some catches people off guard, is fairness is not the goal, because a fair implies alternating wins and losses. The goal is to do the best thing. And don't look at it as a loss. If it's a collaborative solution, nobody really loses. What happens is we do the best thing for family, weather service, personal relationship, whatever you're talking about. And that's really the goal, is to fix this and find the best way forward. It's not to be fair, because fair doesn't necessarily mean equal. So a couple books I recommend. I don't get any kickback from Amazon on these, but Crucial Confrontations is a pretty darn good book. I've had it for many years and bought the new versions when they come out. Again, it talks about introspection first. Work on me first. What's my story? And understand your reasoning behind why you have this problem with this confrontation. Describe the gap. Again, communicate collegially, ask questions on point, and then collaborate for a plan. So a lot of the techniques are the same, they just have a different word to them. But I recommend this book. The other book that I recommend is Crucial Conversations. Again, very similar, start with the heart. And this is a difficult thing for some egocentric leaders. Don't let the need to win or look good get in the way of solving a conflict. Because you can win and you can look good, and the conflict gets worse. And I'll tell you, your work just increased. And you're not going to look good very long, and the win that you think you had isn't going to last, because the conflict continues. So communicate, share, common purpose, common goal. Make the conversation safe, meaning it's about your feelings. You're not attributing and telling them terrible things about themselves. You're trying to understand their point of view. Start with the facts. Don't start with, you shouldn't do this to me, or, you must hate me because, stay positive, and then ask questions on point. Be curious. Ask twice as many questions as statements you make, and to understand. And you'll find out sometimes the answer is a little of both. So I recommend this book as well. So what we'll do is on the follow-on over the next month or so, I think we have a follow-on, we're going to take some exercises from these several books and send them to you and have you role play some confrontations and practice, and you'll get better at it. Hopefully, that's the goal, right? So, and one other thing I want to talk, I'm just learning about this, and I try and learn all the time, but I'm learning about a Japanese art called kintsugi, and I hope I'm saying that right. But it's a traditional art of mending pottery with gold. It dates back to ancient times when pottery was very valuable. And when it broke, you couldn't just go to TJ Maxx and buy another one. You actually had to try and fix it. But sometimes when you fix it, it didn't look great. So what the kintsugi art form is it highlights the fractures, such that something has been broken and restored is now more beautiful than it was when it was unbroken. So transforming relationships, not by hiding the faults, but by revering them. And if you think about your office or personal relationship or your family, if you go through something tough together, and you come out the other side with these cracks, that you're stronger. You're actually stronger than we went into it before this happened to you. Now, not every time, and it's not just, sometimes terrible things happen, but the idea that the conflict that you have is part of the very fiber of the relationship that you're trying to preserve and protect. And if you can resolve a conflict, your relationship is stronger with your team. And so I'm actually learning more about this. I'm going to try and take a class. You actually take pottery and break it, and then they teach you. And it's like a 6 or 7 day process. It teaches humility. It teaches patience. It teaches, trying to put things back together. It's, it's very, I guess, very deep. But I'm trying to find a kintsugi class with all my spare time. So, so what's at stake? And I say your very peace of mind is at stake with conflict management. And I guarantee you're going to make mistakes. I'm no expert, and I make mistakes. But what I do have is an accountability partner who we have a respectful enough relationship where if I make a mistake, they'll tell me and I'll listen. I may not like it, but I will listen. Your intentions are complex. My intentions are pure. They're the ones that's the problem. No, and that's the third part. You have contributed to the problem. Because one thing I know about every conflict you have ever had, you were part of it. The only thing common about the millions of conflicts you've had in your life is you. And so your intentions are complex, and you have contributed to the problem. So, it's not easy. It's not always fun, but I think it's important to do this. And if you use it as a leadership skill, we can then actually improve relationships, which, in the workforce is a business case for doing better work for our partners. In our personal life, it's invaluable to have relationships where you've got the trust to resolve conflict and move forward. So those are my slides. There's my email up there. I'm happy to answer questions on email. I'm happy to answer questions in the chat. I think we've got a few minutes left.
Yep.
I'll let Christina jump in here.
Yep. So we've got some time to answer some questions. We already have a couple that have gone in, so feel free to add those into our chat. And while we are waiting for those to come in, I'm also going to send you all a link to our Google site. This is the Leadership Academy Google site, and a place where you will be able to look for our recording of this and copies of materials that Ken has suggested for us. And this is where the follow-up activity will go, in addition to an insider article that will link you here. Also doing a little teaser here as we wait for questions to come in. Our next webinar for this series will be on planning and executing an office budget. But what we would love is for you all to help inform that session. And so we have a survey up there we would love for you to take to either submit questions you have about how the office budget process works, or, you know, like, who do I contact for X, Y, or Z? And if you are a seasoned supervisor who has a lot of experience with this process, we would love to get tips from you to share with your fellow managers and supervisors. So please fill that out by September 1st, and we will have our session, I believe, in October. Unless you guys give us way too much we have to cover, we may delay it a little, but our goal is October for that. We do have one question that came in, Ken. Do you have suggestions for handling a situation when the parties don't want to resolve the conflict?
Well, you can make people do things, but not nicely. You know, so the question is if the conflict is impacting the ability to accomplish either it's your mission or if it's outside of work, whatever, then you probably have to intercede as a leader and try and find a solution. If they just want to fight and it doesn't impact anything else, let them fight. I mean, if they want to be miserable, they're not taking anybody else down, more power to them. I don't have enough years left in the earth to be miserable. And so, but if they are impacting others or impacting morale, impacting mission, impacting relationships, you have to act. Now, I would like each one of you to take personal responsibility to do that, but you know, that's going to be a choice on your part whether you do it too. But to make them, it's pretty tough to make them do it. There are some tools we can use. We have facilitation. We have some other professional services that we can actually bring people in to talk about a facilitated discussion and have a professional there to help them if the conflict is bigger than just two people not getting along, if it's impacting the office. But ideally, we'd like to have a leader jump in and help out. And if that doesn't work, a discussion, a facilitated discussion, a mediation session, those are all possible. And your supervisor can contact your regional deputy director, and we know how to set up all these sorts of things. We've done it, I don't know, 3 or 4 in Central Region over the last few years. Just hire a professional communicator, and we facilitate a discussion between people. And generally, it works out pretty well. They may not come out of it, with singing Kumbaya and a group hug, but they understand each other a little better, and maybe the tenor is turned down a little bit. So that might be all you need to do.
All right. So thank you for that. Looking for the rest of the questions, most of it's kind of logistics questions. As far as, are you okay if we share a copy of slides on the site here?
Absolutely.
Okay, we will get that up on the Google site, in addition to lists of some of the books that Ken has recommended. And as somebody asked, how will we manage the exercises? How will we get that information out? Look for the insider announcements, those emails that come from the comm shop that you probably just immediately delete on Mondays. Pay attention to those. There will be some info in there for the follow-up exercise and announcing the next webinar. But any of that content, once we get it loaded, will appear on this Leadership Academy Google site for you. And we did have one more question come in.
Okay.
What do you do when 2 people don't want to acknowledge that they're wrong or that there even is a conflict?
Well, denial is not only a river in Europe. Yeah, yeah. So I think then it's time for an honest discussion, because if their conflict is, even if they don't acknowledge it, that might be a great chance for one of those I feel. So when you and I apologize to any of the Franks listening, when you and Frank act this way, I feel like we're not able to accomplish our mission. It seems that you're in constant state of argument that impacts the rest of us. Maybe it's one of those statements that you can craft with a peer and try and bring it to their attention. Odds are they probably know it. Some people just like to be unhappy. I think there are people with a personal motto that says, I'm not happy until you're not happy. And sadly, we have those in society, and the Weather Service is not immune to societal things. So, but I think bringing it to their attention, offering to intercede if you feel comfortable doing that, just acknowledging that it exists in a respectful way might be enough to get them to either acknowledge it. Yeah, we know we've been fighting for 30 years. There's nothing you can do to change it. I forgot why we're fighting. We're just fighting. And you might have to live with that conflict and just manage it because it's not going to get solved. It's probably not what you wanted to hear. I don't have an answer for, everything. It's people, so it's always different.
Your favorite line is always it depends, right?
It depends.
Ken? Yeah.
It's one of my favorite lines. Well, it depends. Yes.
All right. Well, that's the last of the questions that we have in here right now. Like Ken said, do feel free to email him or me, Christina Crow, here at the training center, and we'll get you in touch with Ken or other folks who can answer your questions. And with that, we will end 4 minutes early.
How about
Ken?
that? You get 4 minutes of your day back.
And thank you everybody for joining. And like I said, keep an eye out for those comms emails on the Insider for announcements for our next follow-up activity and our next webinar. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.